right, am I good to start, or are we going to wait a little bit longer?
I think it's fine. It's already 5 past.
Okay. Yeah, but again, thanks everyone for joining. I believe we're going to have an AlphaEarth presentation today, which will be great. Before we get into that, just see if there's any other community updates, other interesting things that people have found, embeddings things that you want to share. We also have the Slack channel as well to do that. And I know from last time, we were talking about a funding proposal for a workshop, and I think Hamed was working on that. I don't know if he's on right now. We can follow up with that later. Maybe we'll just go straight into our presentation then. Who's giving that today?
I'm giving that today.
Okay. I'll give it over to you and I'll take notes.
Sure. All right, let me find the screen share. All right, are folks able to see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so my name is Valerie Pasquarella. I am a research scientist at Google, and I've been working with my amazing colleagues on both the Earth Engine team and in Google DeepMind on AlphaEarth foundations and the satellite embedding data set. So I was asked to give an overview for this group today. It sounds like we'll have a bunch of time for questions. I'm gonna keep it kind of high level, but happy to talk more about details after the talk. And so probably don't have to convince this group, but I always like to set up presentations on AlphaEarth foundations, talking about this golden age of EO data archives that we find ourselves in. So we have more images than ever before. We've got tens of millions of images from just Sentinels and Landsat in the Earth Engine data catalog. And like, for example, we add about 100,000 new Sentinel-2 images every week. So these are huge archives. Again, I think preaching to the choir here, but as they continue to grow, the real challenge becomes translating these records of imagery into the insights that people need to better manage landscapes, detect changes in water resources, all sorts of amazing environmental work. Starts with images, but then in between, we've got to have some form of pre-processing and modeling. And we've seen more and more that this becomes the bottleneck in being able to do geospatial analysis and generate those insights. And so we've been working on a new model called AlphaEarth Foundations. Again, super high level. When we started talking about this with a lot of our community, we often would show this really simplified diagram that it's really just an encoder-decoder structure here where we're generating the latent representation in between and kind of communicating to everyone the idea of the reconstruction targets as our quote unquote labels for this work. We now have a more complete diagram available in our paper. People have been curious for a long time. So if you haven't checked it out, the link to our preprint is there. But this is again, you can think of it kind of encoder-decoder structure. But what we're doing here is
Valerie, you're on mute. It switched for some reason.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So I don't know where it muted me, but
it's 5 seconds ago.
I got it. So yeah, so for the model, we are processing raw sources, so kind of the lowest level of processing available in the Earth Engine catalog for Sentinel-2, Landsat 8 and 9, and Sentinel-1. So we've got optical information from Landsat. We also take the panchromatic and thermal bands, and then the C-band SAR from Sentinel-1. These come through kind of our pre-processing chain. We end up stacking everything together into this giant input feature vector, and then push that through basically where most of our model parameters are these STP blocks, which stands for space-time precision. This is a custom bit of architecture where we're combining both spatial attention, time axial attention, and some small convolutions so that we're able to understand relationships at the scene level spatially, kind of localized relationships, because we really care about having a pixel level output, and the time relationship, so being able to track the evolution of images and pixels through time. So this all comes out into a bunch of output features, and then another key structure in the model is our summarizer. So one of the unique capabilities of AlphaEarth Foundations is the ability not just to generate per image embeddings, but to summarize embeddings over a specified time period, which we call the valid period here. And so we give the model a time start and a time end, and its job is to then take the embedding block coming out of the SDP section and summarize into a single 64D vector. We have a bottleneck abides by a Van Mises-Fisher distribution, and then from that kind of bottlenecked sampling of the embeddings, we then reconstruct into various targets from other sensors. And so this is where we really learn the relationships between those input time series and all of these other sensors, and our latent becomes this mutual information between all of our sources. And so, yeah, just showing a little bit more detail here. So I've got those STP blocks. I'm already kind of mentioned some of this, but the precision pathway is giving us our local detail, time's giving us the temporal information, and we've got those spatial dependencies. The embedding vector is then able to characterize both all the relationships plus the summarization over time, so that each of our vectors is essentially representing an XY, T start, T end coordinate, and we embed to 64 dimensions. So you can think of this as a position on a 64-dimensional unit sphere. And yeah, I already showed the reconstruction path here, so where we're able to recreate images from individual sensors. And usually we get questions immediately: what sources went into the model? What did you use for these targets? And so here is the full list of our data sources. I already mentioned Sentinel-2, Landsat 9, Sentinel-1. For reconstruction, we also use ALOS Pulsar, ScanSAR data, the Copernicus DEM, LiDAR returns from JEDI, including all of the relative height metrics, climate variables from ERA5. These are the monthly aggregates, and we got precipitation, air temperature, surface pressure, gravity field information from GRACE, which tells us something about subsurface water dynamics. We've got a little bit of weak supervision with the National Land Cover data set, and we more recently added the USDA NAS CDL labels and kind of tuned down the weights there a little bit, and some text information coming in from Wikipedia and GBIF points. And in total, our pre-training data set includes about 5 million sites distributed globally, both in terms of places where we had text information and sampling ecoregions to make sure good representation. And for each of those sites, we sample 2 video clips. And so we end up with about 10 million of these movies of our input and target images for a total of 3 billion 1.28 by 1.28 kilometer images going into the pre-training part of this. So it's a really big pre-training data set. I figured for this group, maybe go a little bit into the other objectives here. So I already mentioned reconstruction. So that's just randomly selected frames. And we use both the sensor metadata and time codes as part of the reconstruction path there. But because we really wanted to focus on embeddings as the output and a directly usable output of the model, we also have these additional objectives. We have the batch uniformity objective, which allows us to ensure the embeddings are well distributed over our unit sphere. And really at the end of the day, this just makes sure we have a standard range and kind of everything is situated on this unit sphere. We use what we call contrastive consistency to deal with sensor dropout and missing inputs. The idea here is we're well aware sensors come online, go offline. Think when Sentinel-2 came on kind of mid-year in the beginning of its time series, Sentinel-1B dropping out, as well as differences in acquisition frequencies. And so we have a contrastive consistency where we're using a teacher model that gets a full time series of images, a student model that's only getting a portion of that, and they're tasked with making sure that the embeddings coming out with more or less inputs are still consistent across both. And then I alluded to, we do use text information. So we have a text contrastive objective, which is allowing us to align embeddings, frozen embeddings generated from the text of Wikipedia articles that are linked to the locations of those articles, or in the case of species observations, the species observations from GBIF. And the model is tasked with aligning the embeddings coming out of the Earth observation pathway with the embeddings coming out of the text information. And that just really is helping us add some semantics to the feature space, so that when we're generating these, we can kind of cluster like with like, and hopefully encode not just the raw observation information, but give it that little bit of semantic organization. And so at the end of the day, we tend to think of AlphaEarth foundations as a virtual satellite that can take these non-uniformly sampled, sparse observation records coming from a bunch of different sources. The capabilities are that it can harmonize all of these different data sources into a single record. And then again, I mentioned the time summarization. So the ability to then take that record and summarize it for any length of valid period. You could imagine generating embeddings for a day or a week or a month, or in the case of our satellite embedding data set, a year. And so, yeah, just another diagram. So what comes out of the model is what we call an embedding field, something that's intentionally designed to be surfaced as an image of embeddings. Those embedding fields have 64 dimensions, so we surface these as images with 64 bands, one corresponding to each of the embedding axes. And therefore, we have an embedding vector for each 10-meter pixel on Earth's terrestrial land surface and coastal and nearshore waters. I did want to go through really quickly here some of our evaluation information, because we got asked about that a lot as well. So I'm sure not telling anyone anything new here, it's very hard to validate an embedding or a representation directly as something that's learned. I mean, you can come up with all sorts of ways to quantify uncertainty and how the embeddings relate if you drop sources or change the inputs in some way. But really what we care about is how embeddings perform on downstream tasks. And so we have a total of 10 different sources. We did a huge lit review, looked at all sorts of reference data sets and other existing human annotated or field measured information, plus a couple of data products that we used as proxy tasks. But in the end, we had 10 different data sources, derived 15 different data sets from them. And these were all selected really to represent real world applications. So linked to specific products, or again, major field campaigns, validations of map products. And we tried to aim for a mix of different domains. So we've got land cover, land use, crop types, tree genre, sort of species distribution modeling, palm plantations, evapotranspiration, surface emissivity. So kind of a broad spectrum of tasks that we were looking at performance on. And these are also different types. So we have classification, various numbers of classes. In some cases, even a single data set might have different legends that we were able to utilize, or different hierarchies, like in the case of Lucas, in the case of Canada crops, we have two hierarchies, one that's finer and one that's coarser. And we also have different coverages. So geographic extent varied for these different data sets, as did the temporal cadence. Some we did annual summaries, some are single date. OpenET is monthly. And you can see from the map down there in the corner, we really do achieve global coverage across all of these data sets, and representing, again, different domains, different task types. And an important thing I want to call out, we did optimize for low shot performance. We assume that most people want to be able, if they're starting from scratch, not to have to collect thousands, tens of thousands, millions of labeled points, and be able to train a model. And so we focused on point-based annotation, since that was very common in the sorts of reference data sets and mapping applications that we were looking at. And all of our evaluations have no more than 300 points per class. So some have less, but really we topped out at 300 labels. We also did trials with 1 and 10 samples per class, and those are summarized in the paper. But again, really this was trying to look at performance in those low shot regimes. And also worth noting, our test classifiers, we used KNN with K equals 1 and K equals 3, and just simple linear classifiers here, with the assumption that anyone using anything more sophisticated, think your SVMs random forests would hopefully achieve better performance, especially if they choose to use more data. We compared to some range of approaches. We really focused on other approaches that were either generating embeddings or performing featureization. We used XY and XYZ as controls. We think these are a really great way to just test if lat long or lat long and elevation are explaining variability in a data set. We tried a VIT as well that was just pre-trained on ImageNet as a control on like, what if you just do deep learning, but you don't have anything specialized for Earth observation. It's just kind of a standard camera image model. Image composites as kind of a standard remote sensing practice, the continuous change detection and classification algorithm outputs, which are these harmonic spectral temporal features that show up in a lot of production workflows that we've seen, and mosaics, which is an engineered embedding space that uses random kernels to learn an embedding, and a couple of different models that were specifically designed for Earth observation data, namely SatClip, Pleasant model, Prithvi, and Clay. And we tried to put these all on as much equal footing with how we were evaluating AlphaEarth foundations using the same inputs. And I will also note some of the variability in dimensionality here. So one of the nice things about AlphaEarth foundations and one of the trade-offs we made was going with the 64 dimensions as kind of a sweet spot between expressivity and usability. So again, thinking we wanted people to be able to just run a random forest on top of this in a platform like Earth Engine and not be overwhelmed with the size of the feature vector. Don't want to spend too much time on all of this, but happy to answer more questions. We did find as shown in the paper that compared kind of across the whole suite of evaluations that the model consistently outperformed the other approaches that we considered in this specific evaluation framework. We considered the errors here in terms of balanced accuracy with a kappa adjustment, so trying to be as conservative as possible. And really the big take home has been that it's like not just performance on any one data set, but we really wanted to see good generalized performance across all 15 of the evaluations we were looking at, given the diversity of domains and types. But as you probably all know, it's not just about how well we do in the statistical sense. Those are our benchmarks that we use to feel confident that the embeddings work well for the sorts of things we want to see them work well for. But in terms of usability, that is where our satellite embedding data set came in. So we recently launched the satellite embedding data set in the Earth Engine data catalog. These are annual summaries. I mentioned AlphaEarth foundations can summarize different periods. So these are annual summaries generated by the model. We have layers for the years 2017 to 2024 and expect to continue to generate new layers in the future. And these are just a standard Earth Engine image collection. So we've surfaced these as images. I mentioned before, like each pixel has 64 bands. It functions just like any other image that you would use for a Earth observation powered workflow. And the hope is it can be easily substituted for where you might normally use, say, Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, Landsat to kind of give you that boost of AI power. We'll just say a little bit on how the collection is structured in case that's of interest. Embedding fields are continuous, so we do have coverage over the full Earth surface, given how image collections usually work in Earth Engine and just manageability. We do surface them as tiles, and so here's just a little example showing the tiled representation. These are in their local UTM projection. And yeah, so we have image tiles, and each of those tiles consists of the per pixel embeddings. Another nice property is the embeddings are linearly composable, so they work well when you pyramid in Earth Engine, which is a pretty standard zoom in, zoom out, and you'll still preserve the distance relationships and hopefully the semantic meaning of the embeddings. So we really designed the output of AlphaEarth foundations to surface embeddings, and then the collection to work well with how we would hope people would use the embeddings in practice, and kind of mapping to where a lot of folks in the EO community are already at in terms of building on top of images. This was a great way to kind of make it feel very familiar, but still have all that AI power in there. And I was doing more of an applications presentation, I would now tell you a lot more about kind of how you would do each of these things. We've got some really cool examples and tutorials on using similarity searches. So being able to quickly look at the embeddings and find other places that are similar in the world. Having global coverage is great for that. And I feel like it's almost like the NDVI of the embedding world, where you just take a simple dot product between embeddings and you can start to look for similarity and just kind of single point searches. Obviously, classification, regression, and change detection are things that we tested for in our evaluations. And the goal here, again, being able to make accurate maps with less data, scale your plot measurements or other continuous biophysical variables. And by looking at changes in embedding vectors through time, you can start to do kind of unsupervised change detection. Obviously, you need labels if you want to get into attribution, but just kind of that first pass, have the embeddings changed year to year. You can do that very quickly and very easily. So just in quick summary, AlphaEarth Foundations was designed to function as this sort of virtual satellite whose images are summarizing surface dynamics over space and time. We're providing harmonization and summarization capability because we're able to learn these meaningful patterns across different data streams. And the embeddings that we're generating are both spatially precise in the sense they're 10-meter resolution and temporally precise in that we can choose the interval over which they are summarized for, and we respect time ordering and sequencing when generating the results. And our outputs, as I mentioned, were specifically designed with practitioners in mind. I kind of reduce this sometimes to say it's kind of like an AI-powered image composite. If you're used to working with composites, like we're using all the goodness of deep learning to learn a summarization here. And we hope that embedding images, like I imagine most of you, will become this foundation on which other Earth observation applications can be built. And we've got lots more materials. We did a couple of blog posts, obviously the code examples with the data set, and we've got an Earth Engine tutorial series, and yeah, just lots of good resources here, and happy to share more links if folks want to follow up. With that, I can stop and take any questions.
It was great. Thank you. I have a lot of, okay, so Bruno, first hand up.
Oh, wow, I'm so dark. Okay, now it's good. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the presentation, Valerie. Kudos on the model. It's amazing. And it was so nice to see that Clay was included. I'm Bruno, the co-founder of Clay and Legend. And I have 3 questions. One is that you were the first ones that we know of that use Clay in the benchmark. So thank you for that. You use Clay 1.0, not Clay 1.5. And I only mentioned that because for the 1.5, we made a significant change, 2 significant changes that I think could be really interesting for to hear your thoughts, which is that we allow any input, not just Sentinel or Landsat or others, to parameterize with the wavelengths. And it would be amazing to know why you specify only for those. Sorry, I think my camera is acting funny, but you can still hear me, right? Okay, yes. So what is the inputs, and why restrict that to those inputs? Then I guess I'll throw all the questions and then you can pick which ones you want to answer. The other one is that the valid set for time is a really interesting idea, but it's also kind of a user choice. Some users will want a year time, and some a monthly time, and some a daily time. So that's the part of the innovation on that model that I struggle a little bit, because it seems really useful, but it also seems something that ideally the user can choose for themselves. But because this model is closed and not available, then we just get what you do. So I'd love to know more about that. I like to also think of expanding that idea of the valid window to not only time but also space. Is there a way that we can define the pixel embedding valid time, but also the pixel size of that? That would be super interesting to try to figure that out, which connects to the idea of maybe the embeddings could be the Matryoshka style, where the first dimensions are annual time, then monthly, then daily, and then the user can choose what part of the embedding to do. Anyway, I'm starting to digress on that. And the last question, which is plans. Do you have plans to generate more embeddings? These are amazing. And I'm sure there is companies and nonprofits who want to use them, but we only get what you do because it's a closed model. So do you have plans to do more? Do you plan to do SLAs on those? So that's the questions, but kudos to you and the whole team for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and good to know on the clay versioning. As you know, a lot of this work takes place over long stretches of time, so we used what was available when we were running our benchmarks, but good to know there's a more recent version. In terms of restricting inputs, we thought very much about kind of like flagship stable signal sensors with broad area coverage and great calibration. And so we went with Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, and Landsat as kind of the sensors we would be dependent on for inference. And then we used all of the other sensors on the reconstruction side, especially ones that had less coverage in time. ALOS Pulsar has a lot of variability in coverage. JEDI obviously is super sparse footprints. And so it was the way we set up the inputs versus the targets helped us a lot in dealing with the different data frequencies, sparsities, but still allowing us to encode information from the target variables into the embedding, since they're kind of working in conjunction there. And we did some experimenting worth saying. We tested things as inputs, other sensors that are now targets, and typically found that going with Landsat Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 seem to be our best bet. And so, yeah, that's the inputs. In terms of the valid time, 100% agree. So obviously, storing these embeddings is a really big challenge. They're large data sets. And so we went with an annual summary for the satellite embedding collection to start, because we know a lot of people make annual maps. We were hoping that would address kind of the broadest set of use cases and maybe one of the easiest to think about, summarizing a calendar year. That said, we're in the early stages of looking into what we think of as like an on-demand program where you'd be able to specify a custom time period and generate embeddings for that. The trade-off there being, as you said, there's a lot of people who want specific things for their specific areas, and looking at kind of what we're serving as a data set for the entire community versus what someone might want for a specific study for a smaller area of coverage. So trying to balance that. And right now we're very much listening to the community if there's specific requests, time periods, just use cases that would be unlocked by having different valid periods. We'd love to hear more, and we're definitely talking to a lot of users and trying to get a sense for demand and interest here. Similarly, on the valid periods in time, so as I mentioned, the embeddings are composable, so it is very easy to just resample them to coarser resolution. So if you wanted to create some sort of kind of patch level, you could go up and just take an average, or, I mean, get more creative, how you want to aggregate them, whether it's just a simple aggregation over a larger scale, or do you want to be more selective and look at embeddings within segments, or some other way of aggregating. And so really we went for kind of the finest resolution given our inputs, with the understanding that you could, within the framework of Earth Engine, or if you're exporting, just resampling should be fairly straightforward. If I'm remembering discussions on more of the Matryoshka style, it just gets very complicated in data structure. And again, a priority here for us was making it kind of just a very standard image format, akin to what folks have already been used to working with from the sensors themselves. And in terms of generating more, we are expecting to continue to produce the annual layers going forward, and again, looking into options for that more custom embedding generation and what that would look like more operationally. I think that was all of them.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, deal.
Hi. So I find it interesting that these even though these are pixel level embeddings, they also seem to encode spatial information. Like each pixel's embedding encodes information about its neighbors, right? Pixel, like what's the size of the neighborhood, which is like whose information is blending into that pixel. Do you have an idea of that?
Yeah, so I mean the spatial attention, it's learned, so the model's going to pick what it attends to, but the chip that we give it is 1.28 by 1.28 kilometers. So you get just over a kilometer of spatial context, plus that precision pathway where we really kind of look at that super localized window right over the target pixel itself. But yeah, we've got a little over a kilometer, and you'll see that show up in, like, as you're working with the embeddings, especially like similarity searches. Sometimes you'll see interesting relationships where you can tell there's something like a city that has temperate vegetation near it might show up as more similar as another urban area that has temperate versus tropical, though cities are generally pretty similar across the board, as we've seen.
So it's kind of the entire chip, basically. Like,
yeah, it gets fed in the whole series of chips as, like, we think of it like a video model, since we're really dealing with all of these frames of imagery in sequence as you would as standard kind of video, except they're irregularly sampled. So we have to be very careful about how we handle time through the whole process.
And would this affect how, like, if you use it for something like segmentation, since the information is kind of blending in, would it like be not as precise around the boundaries or something like that?
We found that it produces really coherent segmentations. And I think with the precision pathway, we're still maintaining that's, again, super localized relationship with a little bit of convolution over the pixels. So we do actually get good crisp boundaries as far as I've seen, and not a segmentation expert, but in terms of like making a land cover map using pixel inputs, those single points in our eval data sets, the results are very smooth and very natural kind of clusters, not a lot of salt and pepper noise, and definitely not that like big blurring effect that you might get like training a like UNet or some of the other kind of more where you get a lot of blending between boundaries.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Johan?
Hey, sorry, I kind of joined a bit late, but I have a question in terms of where you think the field is going. Because like what I was most excited about with AlphaEarth Foundations was that it was providing a path to A, more usability, but B, also much more efficiency. I think this is something very exciting. And it's also related to the fact that Google can provide this easily with Google Earth Engine, right? Now, the next natural step would be that we wouldn't require embeddings anymore. It would be more like a zero-shot thing, which is naturally much more complex. I don't think that this is currently the scope of anyone in this call really, like at scale, but I'm still interested whether you think that this is something that we will see happening in the next 1 or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, because this is what maybe would bring something like a ChatGPT-like moment to this entire community.
Yeah, I mean, definitely blue sky sounds very exciting. We are very interested in seeing through the application side, as you mentioned, like how people are going to use embeddings, especially we're looking more into that on demand and different summary periods. We've definitely seen some exciting applications with users starting to pair with text and natural language queries. Saw a cool demo just a couple of weeks ago from some of our users who are training on image patches and aggregating up the embeddings and doing kind of the VLM style approach to just question and answer from the images, like similarity search from text. So yeah, we are definitely interested in seeing where the embeddings take us and how they're received. And yeah, I would be curious to see where everyone else thinks things are heading as well. Like I said, we're mostly focused on landing the embeddings that we have now.
Makes sense. Cool. Thank you.
There's a question in the chat. Sorry, they joined late. Curious if lower resolution pixels will be created for older data for example, 30 meters for the last 30 years?
It's a really great question. Again, similar to on-demand, we are very much listening to the community right now and seeing what other use cases would be served here. So no plans I can speak to currently, but if there's interest here, definitely, I mean, data set request in the Earth Engine catalog, that's how we've been registering a lot of the on-demand requests, and just letting us know specifically, like, what are the use cases that would be helpful with. And that's the best way for us to get support for kind of these different versions of things, is hearing from the community, like, here's this amazing thing I could do if only I had. And the more of that signal we get, the easier it is to make a case to invest in the research for it.
Cool. I had a question. You mentioned summarization embedding earlier in your presentation. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, and I wish my DeepMind colleagues were here to go into more of the nuts and bolts. But this is the idea that what comes out of our space-time precision blocks is still a feature vector that has the full dimensionality in time as the input vector. And so we have a block in the model that takes that, like, many time stepped vector that's gone through all of the space-time precision processing and summarizes over the period of interest. And so the model actually gets two different pieces of information. It gets what we call the support period, which is what we actually sample the images from. And then that valid period that I was saying for summary is actually the period that's summarized over. So you can imagine for an annual embedding, we give you a support period that includes all the images for a given year, and then we summarize over that entire year. But you could also imagine, giving a year of images and then asking for a summary for just the day at the end or the month at the end. And so the summarizing piece is where we're saying, okay, take all of this information that you've processed and now summarize for this specific set of dates with some awareness of the sequence that was going in. So if you have an image within the valid period, it obviously improves the estimates. You can anchor it on real imagery. I believe it's possible to, like, specify outside the window and kind of, like, look forward, but yeah, the valid period is what we're summarizing, and the summarizer piece of the model is what's taking those, like, very the sequential time outputs and then collapsing them into that single 64D vector for the period of interest.
Okay, makes sense. Romeo, you were next.
Maybe you mentioned it already, but the question is, you said you have sparse samples, no, because of the SWATs, no? So and you said you need to take care of that. Is there a recipe how to take care of that? Is it something you can share?
Yeah, masking. And so our sparse inputs, when we're going to reconstruct them, imagine you've got one little Jedi footprint in the middle of the 1.28 kilometer image that we're trying to predict for. The model is, only tasked with reconstructing where we have data. So we use masks to just don't care out all of the other pixels. We also think a very clever trick, like we do that with clouds as well. And so any sort of masking that has to be applied happens on the target side. That way the model is learning only from the good information we want it to reconstruct, and we don't have to worry about having complete coverage and dealing with bad data. That sort of thing all gets handled on the target side.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat. Any plan to open source it?
No plans at presently, so we're working on the ways of interacting with the model, though. So we're very interested in understanding how people use the data set, and yeah, as we're looking at these options for making it possible to generate custom embeddings, I think as folks in this call very well know, a lot of the processing pipeline is very challenging, and it's challenging to get environments set up and all of those things. So we're looking into, again, like the ways we could help people generate the embeddings they want, and not have to do a ton of setup and infrastructure and managing their own inputs and that sort of thing.
Okay, great. Jonas?
Yeah, thank you very much for taking your time to present to us here. I was wondering, because you mentioned the example of classification, land cover classification, whether you made an assessment of how the AlphaEarth Foundation embeddings, how they deal with when land cover changes over the year? Because a lot can happen in a year on a specific location. So for example, when we want to perform flood mapping, the most of the year there's, say, no water in an area, but then there's like a week or so there is, whether you made an assessment whether something like that is possible or not?
So for our evaluations, we did accept different periods depending on when the labels in the evaluation data sets were valid. And so in the case of our change evaluations, they are coming mostly out, or I think entirely out of the LCMAP data set, where those values actually summarize for the whole year, the land cover class, and then we use that as a proxy for change. In terms of what happens within a year, if you were doing your own work with the annual embeddings, we do, like I said, respect the temporal sequencing. And the way I usually think about this is like, if you have an event mid-year and you were to say, do a similarity search, you would find other places that have a similar transition at a similar time. Can't necessarily get all the way down to like when that happened, but you can at least start to group and potentially either use other sources, or if we get to the on-demand phase of things, be able to look at those finer time steps. So as to say, the kind of subannual signals are definitely encoded in the annual layers. I think there could be some interesting work on, can you predict back timing given what you have in the annual embeddings? So it wasn't like something we specifically evaluated on, but we did look at kind of those big annual changes as our change task in the evaluations.
Thank you very much.
Jimmo?
Hey, yeah, thanks so much. This is really interesting. And I was half an hour late. I hope I can get a hold of the recording at some point. Curious if, so I saw on LinkedIn you're directly involved with ecology. What we're doing is we're intersecting individual tree species occurrence data with the tiles. And we're finding some really interesting results with sort of species composition prediction for forest canopies without that much occurrence data, for example. Yeah, I'm curious if you'll be at Climate Week, if there's an opportunity to kind of explore this topic a little bit further, if there's a formal avenue to discuss with the Google team, anything like that would be very relevant for us to kind of make a plan and also share what we're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to follow up offline and discuss specific use cases, but we did test on tree genre. We've had a lot of community interest in species mapping, both in terms of trees, other vegetation types, and yeah, we hope that that's an application the embeddings are really well suited for, and I'd love to hear more about what you're working on and connect.
Is there an appropriate way to reach out to you or to the team?
Yeah. I think my contact information was maybe on the meeting invite. So if you can reach out to me directly and I can route things. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll throw out another question I had. So you mentioned you could take missing inputs but still be able to handle it. So I'm wondering, what if every input was missing except for text, which is another way of asking, like, have you tried text to embedding and using that for similarity search?
Oh, interesting. I don't know if we went that extreme. There are ablations in the paper that show when we dropped different sources, but it was more in the line of like, what if you drop text? What if you drop all the radar? Like kind of ablating back that way. I'm not sure. I can check with the DeepMind folks if that was something we tested, but not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I was interested in the ability, like, can you search for mountain or something like that, and would that generate an embedding that would then find something that were related, or farmland, or something like that?
Okay, so like going from text back to the locations in the embedding space. And not within the model itself, but on the downstream side, yes, that is a cool demo. I think I alluded to earlier. We've seen some folks train on labeled patches and be able to do the text queries to do retrieval from kind of embeddings aggregated up to a patch scale. And I think it was our Geo for Good, or it was our Geo for Good New York talks, and I think the decks for that are available online. But yeah, definitely possible if you want to train a text model to go back and forth, not within, again, the main model, but as something you could do with the embeddings downstream, and their preliminary results were really neat. They had some good identifications of similar targets and interesting differences in spatial distribution, depending on which they tested a couple of different types of embedding. So would recommend checking that one out.
Great, thank you. Isabel?
Yeah, thanks so much for the great presentation. You mentioned the 64 dimensions to be kind of a good sweet spot between usability and expressibility. So I was wondering if you can share any more insights on that, what you guys did for evaluation and to decide on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's like kind of natural that it follows. If you start increasing the dimensionality, yes, you get more expressivity, and you could imagine evaluations, there will be some improvement. But again, we were thinking a lot about practitioners and how we were expecting people to work with this data using classic ML and especially just straight in Earth Engine. And there are limits in how much you can cram into a feature vector. And so, so we definitely tried bigger sizes. We found that 64 was still giving us a lot of expressivity, but is closer to, if you started stacking together all the Sentinel-2 bands, all the Landsat bands, all the Sentinel-1 bands, you're in the, under 100 dimensions, as opposed to a much larger size. So yeah, it was, there were ablations done. We thought about this really carefully. And at the end of the day, 64 was giving us really good results on our evaluations, and just felt like something that was manageable for someone who wanted to run a random forest with a few thousand data points and still be able to keep that in memory in Earth Engine or on a local machine. So yeah, a reasonable number of dimensions there.
Great, thank you.
Just a quick follow-up on that, if I may. Did you have a look on the compression rates, just in terms of like how much data would be in a pixel in terms of floating point numbers, and then you have 64-dimensional embedding with floating point numbers? Do you have any idea how much additional storage you would need to just effectively store all the data?
That I'm not sure. So the one thing worth noting on storage, the embeddings are quantized. So they come out as floating point, but there's a section in the supplement of the paper. We tested a bunch of different quantization approaches. This is all like not within the model. This is post-process, but we do quantize to compress things. So we get down to 1 byte per pixel for storage. When we surface them in Earth Engine, we unquantize them so that they go back to the floating point values. The changes were very minor in the evaluations, and quantization saved us a huge bit on being able to store. And we've been hearing that that's generally a preference across a lot of users, that if they're getting data, they want it as small as possible, and they're happy to apply some simple calculations to get it back unquantized. And so, yes, everything was quantized, and we did look into compression, yeah, with this eye towards storage in mind.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Hey, any other questions, people? Erica put in the chat, when calculating embedding change detection, any tips to tease out types of change, e.g. environmental and surface?
Yes, and so that is maybe one of the more complicated things about the embeddings, is they're encoding so much information across the surface properties and environmental properties that you can start to see things like, if you do simple change detection, you had a wet year versus a dry year, or especially in agriculture, our change for agriculture, the phenology, crop planting, crop type, you'll see changes there. Our general tips here have been supervision. Right. So if you know what types of changes you're looking for, that's kind of the best way to start to sort out, here's what I care about in terms of change. And your kind of negatives in that case would be places that are showing change, but are an environmental change that you may not be interested in. So some sort of the background sampling sort of thing. In the other direction, when you, we think a lot about representation of training sets or label sets in space, but because we're dealing with these kind of multifaceted changes, it also really helps to have representation in time. And what I mean by that is, like, say you're classifying forests, and you don't want to be sensitive to, was it a wet year, dry year, big year for defoliation, that sort of thing. Like, can you apply your labels so it's like, in all of these years, this is an embedding for forest, even though that embedding may move a little bit due to these other factors. And so having the kind of labels for the same place through time, or making sure that you're sampling that same class kind of in vicinity at different points in time will also get you a lot more stability in terms of not being sensitive to those more environmental background changes. And forest maybe isn't the best example here. We see a lot of the fluctuation again in the more water-driven ecosystems like grasslands and shrublands tend to see these bigger changes. So yeah, trying to kind of sample through time and making sure that you're supervising to kind of remove the changes that you're not interested in your classifications.
You mentioned earlier when you were going through your use cases, there was change. Those are available online, like the examples?
Yes.
Okay.
So change detection, if you just go to the Earth Engine catalog page, that's a very simple example of change detection. And we have a full tutorial series developed by Ujjwal Gandhi at Spatial Thoughts. Did an awesome job with, I think there's 5 or 6 tutorials with all the different use cases, code examples, and lots of visuals. So yeah, they're all online on the Earth Engine developers page.
Well, excellent. Any other questions? Well, I guess there isn't. We answered a lot of questions. Thank you so much, Valerie. That was awesome. And I'm sure people will have more questions in the future. You mentioned your contact information was on the invite, I think you said.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
coordinate through Romeo or someone on the leads team if there's folks who want to reach out. Yeah, I can connect through. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been fun to share all this and lots of great questions.
Cool. All right. So then I think we're almost out of time. And then the next meeting looks like it is October 10th, same time. And if people have ideas or things, there's the I'll put the link in I think the link is in the Slack channel. There's a links folder there, so you can see the proposed topics and add things there, or ask people in the Slack channel as well. Great. Thanks, everyone. Anything else, Romeo, you think before we wrap up the call today?
Yeah, maybe you can ask the community if there's some volunteer for being the moderator next time.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Anyone want to do that? They can get in contact with you on Slack, I'm sure. If not,
of course, yeah. Okay, good. Good. Thanks, Jason.
You're welcome. Thanks. It was a great presentation today. Okay, thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your Friday.
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. Thanks so much. Yeah, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.